Well, I want to welcome everybody here today. My name is Hendrick Hendrickson. I've got a few stories to tell you about myself and about my family and my history. I want to start out, I came from Sweden. How many of you here have Swedish heritage, Swedish family? And how many of you, keep your hands up, how many of you have Norwegian heritage? Okay. Now, those of you with your hands up, how many of you have Finn heritage?
No.
Okay. Well, those of you that put your hands down, depending on how much history you've done, you might want to do some checking. My family, well, to give you an idea, my father was born back in 1762. So, and that was right about the time my family at that point in time had lived in Sweden about 150 years. Prior to that, the King of Sweden, King Charles IX, and his son, the King Gustavus Adolphus, which some of you may have heard of, had a program. What the problem was there was a border there. There was a country called Sweden and a country called Norway, and sometimes we got along pretty good, sometimes not so much. But right along the border there, up about halfway up our countries, it was all woodland and mountains. Not very many people lived there. So the kings decided that I need people to take care of this area. And many years before, when the kings of Sweden kind of ruled where Russia is, in Finland, I had sent a bunch of my people over there to kind of settle down those Slavs. Well, now I went over to some of my subjects in Finland and I said, I've got a deal for you. If you come back to Sweden, I'll let you live there for 7 years tax-free. And I'll give you some other incentives, but you have to go settle this area where there's nobody living at. Okay? We need people to make food. You guys are very good at making food. Over in Finland, they raised a lot of rye. But because of all the forests, they did a lot of slash and burn agriculture. So they would go into the forest, burn it down, raise rye there for a couple of years until the land wasn't as fertile, and then they would move on and they'd keep moving around and eventually they'd come back to burn the forest down again. So, my family did this for many, many, many years in Sweden. Up until the iron started becoming popular, to start smelting iron. And at that point in time we needed charcoal. Well, they didn't quite like us Finns. In fact, what they called us forest Finns. Even though we were in Sweden, we'd been in Sweden for many, many years, we were forest Finns. So we weren't the good, pure-blood Swedes. We were kind of that second-class citizen. Well, they really didn't like us cutting down all their trees and just burning them, just to burn them. They wanted to use those good trees for charcoal. So all of a sudden now the king, he wasn't real happy with us. So they came up with a plan. They said we could stay on our lands, but we had to provide charcoal and sell it at a very low price. Of course, this meant that everybody that lived there, farming didn't make a whole lot of money to begin with, barely enough to live on. And now we had to have the extra where we had to try and make charcoal and sell that off at a very low price. We were a very, very poor part of the country. So now not only were we not the full-blood Swedes, but we were really poor people as well. Our cousins that were living in Norway, they didn't have it a whole lot better. Of course, when we all moved in, everybody was happy for a long time. All of a sudden, the King of Norway decided he really didn't like our cousins living there. He even went so far, he told them, you're all done. Everybody out of my country, go back over to Sweden. Fortunately for them, there was a bailiff that was supposed to take care of this, and he saw the conditions that our cousins were living in, and he realized that they probably wouldn't even make the trip across the border. Just 100 kilometers without most of us dying, because we didn't have anything. So he kind of just let them stay under the radar. So that's why many of you that believe you're of Swedish or Norwegian heritage, you need to take a look as to where your family came from. Because you might not be as pure as you thought you once were. Okay. So my family over in Sweden, we decided that things were good for me. I was doing quite well over there. The farms that we had were a little bit different than maybe the farms you typically think of here. I believe the term that they came up with here a few years back was a commune. And that's actually the terms that we use. That's what we call our farms. Everybody kind of all works together on the farm. Okay? And we all kind of share and share alike. Once you'd been there for a while though, and if you got yourself settled in, you could maybe raise yourself up a little bit. Myself, they came up with a term for me called the torpar. And that meant that I was a tenant farmer. So not only did I go and farm the land with everybody else that everybody shared, I had some land of my own. And the way that I paid for that is I would do extra things for the farm on the side. And that was how I paid for my rent, because, well, nobody has any money. So I was able to raise a little bit of rye myself, as well as what the farm did, and I did pretty good. While I was there, met my future wife, Martia. Her family, they lived on a farm not too far away, and we decided we were going to get married. Well, as was the custom, as soon as we decided we were going to get married, we started living together. And as happens sometimes, you tend to get pregnant during that time. So in September, me and a couple of my cousins, we announced our official engagements in September. And we were going to get married that winter. Now, that winter was a hard winter. It was really hard to get around. And as I said, us farmers, we were quite poor. We didn't have a lot of money. And so our pastor, he had a lot of land to cover. And we couldn't afford him to pay very much. We couldn't even afford to get him a horse. So he had to walk to all of his different areas to see us. And it was a hard winter, so our wedding was postponed. In fact, we didn't get married until April. But our first daughter, wonderful, wonderful girl, Helena, she was born in February. Scandalous, terrible, but it was quite common back then. In fact, it was common enough that they actually came up with a term for it. And when you look at her records, she's called a contrahern, which means that a contrahern, which means that her parents were engaged to be married, but were not married yet at the time of birth. Well, we had Helena, we got married, things were going quite well, as you said. I was a tenant farmer. Had another daughter, Aaliyah. I had a son, Martin. And we decided it was maybe time to start thinking about going over to this United States. That kind of young at that point, you know, been around for about 70 years, but it was still kind of a new thing. And while we were planning, we had one more son, Hendrick, named after me, and we thought now would be a good time to leave. So, in June of 1853, we decided to leave, and we boarded a ship in Christiania, Norway. Many of you now may know it as Oslo. And we left there and we sailed to Canada, and we came to the United States, and in July of 1853, we settled in Muskego, Wisconsin, just to get through the winter time, because we were going to be moving on after that. So the following year, we moved on, and we went to Dane County, which is near Madison. And we stayed there for a couple of years, doing a few minor things, and then decided it was time to move on again. Once you're moving once, it's kind of easy to keep moving. So we went over to the western end of Wisconsin, to Bad Axe County. Now Bad Axe now is known by Vernon County, and we settled in the town of Coon, Wisconsin. Now it's known as Coon Valley, Wisconsin. And we lived there for many years. I actually started out with just about 40 acres, and when we decided it was time to leave, I owned a little over 100 acres, 7 years later. We also expanded our family a little bit during the time. Actually, when we were right outside of Madison, I had 2 more daughters born, Kate and Anna. And then I had another son born while we were in Coon, and his name was Hendrick. And one thing I forgot to tell you about our trip